Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen. Tonight we are going to make an Irish lamb stew with an Irish soda bread and some homemade graham crackers that we're going to have for s'mores later tonight. So we're going to start with our lamb stew by prepping our lamb roast. So I have a great big lamb roast here and I'm going to cut it up into cubes and we'll start sauteing it. So I'm going to go in here. Let me cut it in half so I have a little bit easier to work with. And I'm going to use my cleaver to cut this up. So if you don't have a cleaver, but you actually cut up quite a bit of meat, it's actually a great tool to invest in because it cuts through large chunks of meat much better than like a chef knife or whatnot. It just gives you a bit more heft behind each cut, and your blade goes through the thicker areas. So it is one of those investments I made a couple years ago, and I use it every single time I cut meat. It just makes a huge difference. Okay, let's start by cutting these up into some cubes. You want to kind of about 1-inch cubes. Think about what you would have with a normal like beef stew or whatnot. But we're going to be using our lamb tonight because I feel like lamb is a meat that not everybody eats, but it's delicious. It's a bit more gamey than a beef, but again, I absolutely love it. Take off some of that fat. And here, with my clean hand, I'm going to put a little bit of olive oil in my soup pot Dutch oven. So it's slightly different than a regular Dutch oven because it's got a rounded base. And I'm going to turn this on to about a medium. And each one of these chunks of meat that I get up, I'm just going to put in here. And we're going to start sauteing it. And chop this up. But again, I love lamb. My kids have really grown to like lamb too. In the beginning, they were like, "Oh, this is different. This isn't beef," but it's delicious and it's a nice thing to kind of just change up your like winter recipes. Because I feel like we eat a lot of beef stew or chuck roast cooked in different ways during the winter because you kind of want those nice stews. But lamb is lovely, especially like you could do it as a roast. We're doing it in a stew today. We love lamb lollies and lamb chops, but just kind of a good way to change up your protein. And I find we shop at Costco a lot because we are a big family with feeding about 7 to 9 mouths every single night. So their lamb there is fairly cheap. I'm just cutting off some of this fat pieces because those don't cook up well. They'll get just kind of chewy and they don't reduce. Like some bits of fat will reduce down when you cook it, but I find the big white strips, they'll always just be chewy. So we're just going to cut that off, which is great if you're doing a roast because as you roast it kind of renders it down and makes your meat tender. But in a stew you want to cut that off because then you'll just have chewy chunks. There we go. Get these through. We're kind of on a Irish kick right now. I have my husband bring down our decorations for St. Patrick's Day. I've always been crazy about every little teeny tiny holiday there is. So we took down our Valentine's Day decorations and our Valentine's Day like tomtins / gnomes. And I have little Irish gnomes that go up. And we have our little banner. And then we do I got them what I do with my kids every year when they wake up on St. Patrick's Day is we have these little green cauldrons and I fill them up with like rainbow treats and little Irish things for them to have when they wake up in the morning. And they get like green themed clothing. So it's just like, oh, getting it down, getting it ready to kind of celebrate because again, I know my husband always says, "Oh, you go so crazy with holidays." But I said, but that's what you remember as a kid. When you're little, you have the magic and you just the wonder and everything. So I always like to, give my kids the wonder that I had when I was little. My mom always decorated for every little holiday as well. We also did like May Day. And so we'd have like the May baskets. So carrying the tradition. So we can do it. But I was like, oh, I've got to cook some of my Irish meals this week to get us, ready for St. Patrick's Day. So today we'll do our Irish stew with Irish soda bread, which is really kind of like a biscuit. And then we're going to make graham crackers because it was a lovely day today and we kind of cleaned up the yard outside. And my kids are like, oh, can we make a fire, do s'mores? And I was like, oh, yeah, sure. And then I didn't have any graham crackers. So we're just going to make some homemade ones for our s'mores later. And it'll be nice and delicious. Okay, we're almost done chopping off this. I do have them starting to sear off in our soup pot, or you could use a big Dutch oven. This is a hybrid. It is a Le Creuset Dutch oven, essentially, but it's with a rounded base, so it's a soup pot, which means the whole bottom of it doesn't cook as hot, but still is great for soups and stews. There we go. Cut a little bit of that fat off. And then we're going to just kind of chop these through. There. And chop it off. We're going to be seasoning our lamb stew with some paprika, rosemary, cumin, bay leaves, garlic, just some really good seasonings. We'll also be using a little bit of red wine, Worcestershire sauce, beef broth, garlic, celery, onions, carrots in it. So it's just going to be a nice hearty stew. Very similar, Irish folks aren't known for their like super fancy cuisine. They're more known for having that like hearty, home-bodied food that just is like screams comfort. Probably because it's cold and rainy there. So you kind of want that nice comfort food. So this is kind of a nice meal for our day. It was like 60 outside. Now it's getting a little bit cold, and this will just be good. Fill the bellies up. Let's trim off this fat. I'm just going with my cleaver and kind of cutting along the outside of my meat. There we go. And we're going to make these in. Again, you want to do it in about 1-inch cubes. You don't want to do it any bigger than that because think of like when you're eating your stew or soup, you don't want to have a super huge chunk. It will just be hard to eat. Perfect. Like a lot of times when you buy like the stew meat pre-cut at the store, their chunks of there are so big, and then you're going to get just a huge chunk of meat on your spoon, which is kind of harder to manage. Especially if I love to, like, when you buy your silverware sets, it comes with like a small spoon and a big spoon. I only ever eat with the small spoons. I feel like the big spoons are like serving spoons. They're so big. So I always just like to make my food then that works well with the smaller spoons. And we are just about done chopping up this lamb here. This will be a nice hearty stew. This was about, I think it was about a 5-pound roast of lamb. And when I make my beef stews or stuff like that, I like to add a little bit more meat than usual because my boys really like a nice meaty stew. Give my hands a quick wash. And now I'm going to give this a nice stir. And we're going to let it kind of sear off on each one. I'm going to toss in some pepper and some garlic salt to kind of season our lamb to start with as it kind of sears up in our Dutch oven. So nice sprinkle of garlic salt. That is probably about a teaspoon. And then let me grab my pepper right over here. And we'll use about a teaspoon of pepper as well. There we go. And then I'm just going to give a nice stir and I'm going to coat them and we're going to let them brown up. And while these are browning, we're going to work on our Irish soda bread, which again is kind of like a biscuit. There we go. And we're going to let that simmer. Now let's get our stuff for our Irish soda bread. I'm going to be using a bowl, and we're going to start with 3 cups of like all-purpose flour. add this in here. So 1, 2, 3. And then we're going to add 3 tablespoons of sugar. Okay. 1, 2, 3. And then we were going to add a teaspoon of baking soda and then 2 teaspoons of baking powder. Hence where you get the soda bread from, because it has a lot of baking soda, baking powder in it. That's the rising agent that you use versus a yeast or a like a sourdough that uses just that. So 1 of baking soda, and then we're going to use 2 of baking powder. So 1, 2. We're going to take a quick pause from this and give our stew a nice stir, since we want to kind of get it all browning up nicely. It's starting, you can smell just the lamb. It has just a lovely scent to it. Okay, so we put in our baking soda and our baking powder. Now we're going to add in half a teaspoon of salt. And we're going to mix this up, and then we're going to cut in some cold butter. So I'm just going to give it I'm going to use my pastry cutter, and I'm going to just give it a little stir. That way when we cut our butter into it, it's nice and thing. You want to use cold butter. So I left my butter in the fridge, so I'm going to grab that, because like biscuits, cold butter is going to give you those nice kind of flaky texture for it. And we're going to be using a half a cup of cold butter, which is equal to 1 stick. I'm going to get a knife, and we're going to cut it in there, which is equal to 1 stick. I'm going to get a knife, and we're going to cut it in there, and then my pastry cutter to cut it some more. So, but again, you want to use cold butter. Here, peel off our, and if you really want it to be super authentic, you could probably use a Kerrygold and have it even more Irish authentic. There we go. So I'm just going to cut this. The difference that most people don't realize between like European butter or Irish butter and American butter is Irish butter has like a higher fat content and less milk solids than like American butter, which is why they can sell it at a higher cost at the grocery store. But there is a difference. Okay, so we cut in our 1 stick of butter. I'm going to give our stew a quick stir, and then I'm going to cut in the butter into our flour mixture using my pastry knife. A pastry knife is essentially just like 5 blades that work as if you were cutting the butter. And all you do is you just push down into the flour and the butter mixture, and we're going to just cut it up. And essentially you want to just make sure you're cutting up the butter smaller than a size of a pea, so you don't have a butter pocket in our soda bread. There we go. And then I like to go through, just take any butter that has stuck between the blades and cut it out. There we go. And we're going to just cut it in. You could also, if you wanted to, use a food processor. But I find that this goes by so quickly that you don't, I mean, by the time you got a food processor out and did it, you will have this done by hand. Just needs a little elbow grease, but it's not hard. And, you know, just saves the extra dishes. I find like I have a food processor. I rarely use it just because it just takes so much work to clean it and it takes up a lot of like space in my dishwasher. And when you're feeding, 7 to 9 mouths a day, you don't have a lot of room in there for extra stuff. Okay, so we've got our butter now chopped up into our flour mixture. And just cut out these little pieces that might have been stuck. Perfect. And now we are going to add in 1 cup of buttermilk. And I'm going to get a fork and we are going to stir it in slowly. It's going to be shaggy and it's going to be a bit stiff. Let's do one more. I'm going to turn this down. We're going to do one little stir with our lamb. Perfect. So I have got a cup of buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk at home, you can add a cup of milk or a cup of cream and mix it with some lemon juice and let it sit for a little bit. And that kind of works as a good buttermilk substitute. Because I realize a lot of people have buttermilk on hand. There we go, unless you make your own butter. So I'm going to use my fork and I'm going to kind of mix it up. I don't want to over mix it because you want a nice fluffy texture. So just kind of stirring it, and then we're going to flip it out on our counter, and then I'm going to kind of fold it onto itself and press it just like I do when I'm making biscuits or scones. Okay, and this is going to make, instead of 1 big soda bread, I'm making 8 mini soda breads. So it's a little dry, but we're going to start folding it onto each other. Just getting all of the stuff out of the bowl. So we're essentially going to just push and fold. Push and fold. You don't want to mix it in a mixer or over mix it with your hands, because what happens is it turns into a really stiff dough. And instead of having a lovely soda bread, or the same with biscuits or scone, you'll have a rock essentially. So just kind of the fold and the press. This is going to create some nice flaky layers in our soda bread. Again, a soda bread is very similar to like a biscuit. There we go. And fold. Get all of these dry crumbs and try to press those in. And then we'll divide this into 8 chunks. And then we'll give them a little score at the top on our things. And break this. We're going to push it down. Okay. So I'm going to divide this as equally as I can into 8 pieces. So we'll just cut through and there we go. Perfect. Now I'm going to get my baking sheet and I'm going to cover it with some parchment paper, because I love using parchment paper when I bake. My rolling pin over there is rolling back and forth. Let's stop. There we go. Had a very eerie sound to it. Okay, so I've got my parchment paper out, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to kind of make it into like a little bit of a ball, but I'm not really working it so much as I'm just kind of pressing it. You don't want to knead it. So we're going to have essentially 8 little mounds like this, and then we're going to give them a nice little cut at the top to give them that like kind of 4 little leaf like clover look to it. There we go. And just kind of pushing and shaping. There we go. And the trick is not to overwork it again, because you want to have a nice, soft, like fluffy Irish soda bread. There we go. Perfect. I'll push these down and kind of work it in there. Now, you could always leave it in a square or a triangle form if you wanted, but we want it to kind of look like the real deal here. And a lot of times, Irish soda bread, they make it in like a really big one. And then they like can put in, sometimes they'll put in like raisins or currants to make it a little bit sweeter, because they'll have it with breakfast. There we go. We're almost done here. And then we'll go through and we're just going to cut the tops of each one so that when it bakes, it will kind of pop open a little bit. It will help also bake the inside of our soda bread. There we go. And form this one into our little ball as well. It's kind of like a little mound. There we go. And now I'm going to go through, let me get a nice sharp knife, and we're going to kind of just do an X over the top of that. And when it bakes, those will kind of puff open into that like visual, you know, when you see a traditional soda bread. There we go. And these will bake at 375 for about 20 minutes. So they do need a little bit longer to cook than, you know, a regular biscuit or whatnot. So we're going to put these in the oven. I have it preheated to 375. You always, unless your recipe says otherwise, you always want to have your oven preheated to it. So put them out. Got them in there. And then I'm going to set my timer to 20 minutes so we know that we're ready. And then I'm going to give my hands a quick wash because they got a little bit of soda bread on them. Perfect. Now let's head on to our lamb stew, which has been simmering beautifully. We've got all of our meat in here. Now we're going to chop up some onions and we're going to add it to it. Onions, pepper.
And you got a question of what you put into the oven?
The oven, that was our Irish soda bread. So we're making an Irish lamb stew tonight with Irish soda bread, and then we're going to make some sourdough discard graham crackers, since we're going to do a little fire tonight and make some s'mores. So here is my onion. I'm just going to chop off my sides. I'm using a yellow onion. Yellow onions, Valdalia onions, are the best to use in stews and soup. They have a little bit higher sugar content, and they caramelize up nicely, and their flavors work a bit better than the other one. So we're going to cut this in half, and I'm going to about make 5 slices down, and then we're just going to do kind of a smaller dice. There we go. Again, about 5 slices across the onion, and perfect. And then I'm going to toss these onions in with our lamb that has been stewing. Perfect. And then I'm going to give it a nice stir. I'm trying to get all of those onions to kind of start simmering in and releasing their flavor to help flavor the lamb for our Irish lamb stew, which will pair great. We're kind of doing a little Irish theme. We got our Irish decorations down today, so got to get in the mood for it. We got our Irish soda bread, which if you've never had that before, it's very similar to a biscuit, but is delicious, and it will be great to dip into our stew. And we'll be listening. I was deciding whether to do, this is like more of a traditional Irish stew, and then they have a Guinness stew. And I might do that later in the week, do a Guinness beef stew for meal. I know this week I was thinking, like, what are the things I'm going to cook with St. Patty's coming up? And I was like, I'll do every year for St. Patrick's Day, we do a big Irish dinner with corned beef and roasted root vegetables. And I was like, and I'm like, I've got to do shepherd's pie or cottage pie, which is like a stewed. There's 2 ways to do it. You can do it with ground beef or with soup meat. And you do it like stewed meat with mashed potatoes on top of it. It's delicious. And then that's one of the things I make. for that. I also do Reuben, like corned beef sandwiches, delicious, and then just lots of beef stews. Like they eat a lot of beef stews, hearty meals in Ireland. I always like my sister-in-law. She's actually like from Ireland, and we went there. They got married in Ireland for their wedding, so I got to spend about a week there when I was in college, and it was such a beautiful country. And we had to eat at all the pub foods, which is literally stews and potatoes and fish and chips and just nice comfort food. So we're giving up a nice little chop on our carrots here. Since these are pretty thick ones, I kind of quartered them because I didn't want them to be so big in our stew. I always think about how we're going to eat everything. What size do we want to have? We don't want to have a huge carrot in our stew because we want to be able to have every little thing in each bite. And get this chopped up, and we'll toss this into our stew as well. So we've got our carrots going in with our onions and our lamb. And then we're going to chop up some celery. There we go. So when I use my celery, I use the leaves as well. The leaves add just a lovely flavor and a pop of color to our stew. So I have a lot of people, they are full of flavor just like the stock. That same look that parsley will give you. So we're going to be using those as well. There we go. Stir. Perfect. Get all of these in there. And then we're going to stir it up, mix it. I will say lamb, this will be nice. We've had a lot of beef stew this winter, and I was like, I haven't done lamb stew in a while. So it's a nice little change in it. If you've never had lamb before, it's a bit gamier than beef, but still very lovely. Okay, before we cut up our potatoes, we're going to add in some of our spices so they can start seasoning the meat. I'm going to add in, this is tomato paste. I just made it earlier today, but about a 1/3 cup of tomato paste. Tomato paste is something, if I don't have it in my pantry, all I do is I blend up a tomato and I let it sit and cook real slow for a couple hours on the stove just to get it into that nice form, bring out those flavors.
You have a question, are you going to put beer or wine in the stew?
I am going to put some red wine in the stew today. So yes, there is another way you could do it with beer, and I think I might do a Guinness beer stew later this week. So we're going to put in about a teaspoon and a half of paprika and a teaspoon and a half of ground cumin. Let's see. Here we go. And I'm going to then 3 bay leaves. I always like to crunch my bay leaves up in my stews. I feel like they add a bit more flavor that way. And you'd also you don't notice them. So we're going to get these up and I really break it apart. Perfect. And we're going to add a little bit of garlic in here as well. I'm about 3 cloves worth of garlic, or kind of a heaping spoonful. I'm going to give this a nice stir. There we go. Kind of coat all of our meat and our veggies that we have there in the herbs and the spices. There we go. We're going to let it simmer. And then I have some fresh rosemary. We're going to add in about 3 sprigs of fresh rosemary. So let's see, that's 1, 2, 3. And essentially, I'm just going to take it and just kind of pull back. And you see how it's just leaves, the leaves are going in. There we go. I always think that, rosemary looks like pine needles, but have a lovely flavor. There we go. I want to do the same here with this. We're just taking it off the stem and putting it in here. Get all of these little pieces off. And then one more. If you do not have fresh rosemary, you could use dried rosemary. You'd need about, a teaspoon and a half of dried rosemary if you were going to use that as well. There we go. And give this a nice stir. The rosemary just smells so lovely in here. It's a nice fragrant spice. Beautiful. Okay. Now we are going to add in about 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. This has a nice acidity to it, which will help keep our meat nice and tender. And then we're going to add in about a cup of red wine. So I'm just going to eyeball it. Need about right there. A little bit more. Perfect. So a cup of red wine. I'm going to give this a nice stir. It smells lovely. And then we're going to put in about 4 cups of beef broth, or what I'm going to use is some water with some beef bouillon, the paste kind. So we're going to add in about 4 cups of that. And then we're going to get a nice heaping spoonful of beef bouillon. I like to use beef bouillon a little bit over beef broth because I feel like it has you can add a little bit more paste and it gives you a bit more beefy flavor. And it just works great. There we go. Stir that up. And now we're going to let this simmer, but we're going to chop up our potatoes real quick. And I'm using baby Dutch. You could use new potatoes or yellow potatoes. You kind of want to use a little bit of a waxier potato, so russets aren't ideal, but if that's what you have, you can definitely use those as well. There we go. If we can get all of these out. Perfect. So baby Dutch are kind of really just like a yellow potato that is smaller. So I'm going to either have these or quarter them depending on their size. Some of them are rather small, so they don't need much. But here, this is like they get their name. They've got a little yellow inside, but they are a bit waxier and hold together much better in stews than, say, a russet potato. Russet potatoes are more fluffy and are perfect for mashed potatoes, but in soups and stews, they can disintegrate and just completely turn to mush, while baby Dutch or yellow potatoes or new potatoes tend to hold their shape better. And they have a really delicate skin, which means you don't have to peel them, which is nice, versus a russet, you would have to peel it to put it in the soup. Otherwise, that skin would just be really tough and chewy. So get these, we're going to chop these up, and then we're going to let our stew simmer for a little bit. And we're going to work on our graham cracker dough for our homemade graham crackers. And pop in there. We, as I said earlier, we were doing some yard work out there, just getting ready for our garden boxes and getting ready to plant the garden for the new year. The weather's so nice out, and I'm like, oh, it's almost time. It's almost time to plant stuff. And I was like, oh, we've got to burn off some of this, brush. We have a whole bunch of it. And every year we also, like, when we're done with our Christmas tree, we'll burn it in our fire pit as well. So I was like, oh, we can do s'mores tonight. And I promised that to the kids. And then I realized we didn't have any graham crackers. So I was like, well, we'll just have to make some. Okay, so we're going to give this a nice stir. And just kind of coat all of those potatoes in the nice juices from the broth. And now we're going to let this simmer. And again, for those who are joining us, this is our Irish lamb stew that we're going to be making for dinner tonight. Okay, now let's come over here and we're going to start prepping for our homemade graham crackers. Let me just clean up some of our biscuit our soda bread crumbs. There we go. Okay. We're going to be using our mixer for this one. So let's start out. We're going to start with our butter. We're going to use a half a cup. Now we want this butter, we want it to be room temperature because we're going to be creaming it. So we're going to add a half a cup of room temperature butter. There we go. Just getting all that butter off the sides. Perfect. Let's see how much we have on our, about 6 minutes left on our soda bread. And pull it up here. And then we're going to add in about a third cup of honey. So I have very little left, so I'm just going to use the rest of this in here, which is around a third cup of honey. And that's kind of, you think about graham crackers, they have that honey flavor to it. They're honey grahams. So we're going to add a third cup of honey in here. And then we're going to use, once we get that in here, a half a cup of sourdough discard. Let's get there. Honey is like so slow to move out. There we go. I'm going to let it sit for a little bit and then collect at the bottom, and then we'll open it up and add that bit in. So we're going to use a half a cup of sourdough discard. So here's our discard. I'm going to give it a little stir because a lot of times during the fermentation process, a little hooch or the liquid can come to the top. So we need a half a cup of sourdough discard. There we go. And put this over here. We pour that into our mixer. Perfect. And then we're going to just let it start turning and creaming. The discard and the honey and the butter together. I let pour in this last little bit. There we go. So now that we have those, we're going to add in a tablespoon of cream. And then we're going to use a teaspoon of cinnamon. Got to have that nice cinnamon flavor in here. So get our nice teaspoon of cinnamon. And then we're going to do a half a teaspoon of salt. Perfect. And then we're going to use a half a teaspoon of baking soda. So not baking powder, but baking soda. We're gonna let this cream up, and then while it's mixing, I'm going to add in a teaspoon of vanilla extract. There we go. So we've got those mixed together. Well, now we're going to add in 1 cup of flour and 1 1/4 cup of whole wheat flour. Since graham crackers kind of have that kind of earthier, it's not all white flour, it's 1 and 1. That's sugar. There we go. So we're gonna add in our cup of all-purpose flour, and then we'll add 1 1/4 cups of regular flour. So there we go. For 1 cup of flour, I'm going to keep this over here because we might need some when we're rolling out our crackers. And then 1 1/4 of wheat flour. So here's 1, and now we need 1/4 of a cup more. There we go. And then we're going to mix those up until they're combined. And that will be the dough for our graham crackers. Super simple, super easy, but really delicious. gonna be a nice hearty dough. And we'll roll it out nice and thin, and we're gonna bake it at 325. There we go. So we've got it. You can see it's gonna be a nice thick dough that will roll out nicely for our graham crackers. Pull this out. And then check on our lamb stew. I'm going to give it a quick stir here. I always just like to stir it frequently so that nothing gets stuck on the bottom and can burn. Give it a nice stir. Beautiful. You can really tell, like, smell the lamb in it. Okay, let me move my mixer out of the way so we have a little bit more room to work with. And in just a second, our soda bread is about to thing. So I'm just gonna get let me clear off, I got a little honey here. Clear that off so we can roll our dough out and form it into a ball, and then we'll roll it into our graham cracker forms. But I'll pop this out. So it's got that nice kind of brown color from, you know, what a graham cracker, and you get that color from the honey and the wheat flour. Here we go. So we've got this. Now, before we mold this, let's go get our soda breads out of the oven.
And you have a question? Does the beef bouillon hide the lamb taste at all?
Not really. I mean, you won't have a lammy tasting broth, but the lamb chunks will still have it. And if you don't like lamb, you could easily use stew meat or chuck roast. That would work well in it. I know some people aren't a big fan of the lamb because they don't like kind of a gamey meat. Oh, beautiful. They have popped up well. Let me grab my oven mitts on. Got this lovely gold. I probably could have smushed them together a little bit better, but they look beautiful and they're gonna taste beautiful. I'm gonna change my temperature down to 325 because our graham crackers bake low and slow at 325 for about 30 or so minutes. Here we go. And with Irish soda bread, you don't want to cut into them for a few minutes. You need to let them cool down, and so we'll have it there. But let's get we're gonna roll out our graham crackers and we'll have them baking, and then we'll probably post a short later tonight to show you the finished product of them. When we do our s'mores. So here's what I like to do when I'm rolling out something. I'm gonna put them between our parchment paper, and I'll put another one on top, and that way it doesn't stick to the counter and it won't stick to the top. So I've got my dough between the parchment paper, and I'm just gonna kind of roll it all the way out. And we're gonna bake these on parchment paper too.
Got a question. Do you make your own marshmallows as well?
I have in the past, but you know, marshmallows can take a lot of work. They're just a lot of time thing, and they're really sticky. So I a lot of times just buy my own marshmallows, but I have, and I do love a good homemade marshmallow. I mean, you can't beat that. But for s'mores, I find that just the good old, Stay Puft or whatever they're called, those are just the best for s'mores because they have such a good, melting point versus a lot of times homemade marshmallows are more like a French marshmallow, which is a little bit more of a crunch to it. Turn my stew down to about a medium. And we're rolling this out. I know it's kind of hard to tell underneath the thing, but we're rolling it out to a nice kind of a thin area. And what that I'm gonna do is then I'm going to There we go. We've got it right here, and then I'm just gonna cut off the edges and make a nice straight line for them for our thing. Let's turn this guy even more. So we're just gonna kind of cut this. You could use a pizza cutter at home. I'm just using a sharp knife. It works just as well. And then we'll use this dough. We'll roll them out. That way you kind of get those really lovely square things. Put that with the rest of our dough. And then I'm just gonna cut these into like the kind of the squares that you eat a s'more on. So I'm not cutting them into super small pieces. There we go. And then you just are gonna go through with a fork and you're gonna prick holes in them. And this is so that they bake up evenly. So just give you those pretty graham cracker things. And then we're gonna cover them with a little bit of cinnamon sugar. So you've got that nice cinnamon sugar crunch on it, because graham crackers, they're really only sweetened by the honey and then the cinnamon sugar on the top. So they're not really a super sweet food. Go through, give our little pokes. And this is, the poking again is so that it kind of bakes up evenly, so that they're all kind of crunchy. Otherwise, if you don't poke them, your outsides of your graham crackers will be cooked like more crunchy, while your insides could be a bit more chewy. So you kind of poke them that way. There's less kind of a surface area or thickness to kind of heat it up. There we go. Easy peasy. And then I've got my big baking sheet over there. It's a sheet and a half. I'm going to cover this whole thing with a big sheet. And then I'm going to grab a spatula, that way I can slide it under each graham cracker. And we're just going to transfer it right here. And again, we're doing bigger ones because these are going to be perfect for our s'mores. You know, you can't have a bonfire without s'mores. It's just not allowed. Beautiful. Perfect. And then we're gonna just roll out some more dough and get our next set going. So I'm just gonna start kind of pushing it in a little square in here, and then we'll pop those in the oven. We'll sprinkle them with a little bit of cinnamon sugar, which is, I always keep my cinnamon sugar in here, and I always have it because my kids love like cinnamon sugar toast. But it's about a 1/3 cup of sugar with, you know, half a tablespoon of cinnamon. And that's what you would use to mix on it. So again, we're gonna roll these out fairly thin. I'm trying to think about how thin that is. Gosh, I don't know, maybe is that like a centimeter or something like that thick? Just think of how like an actual graham cracker, how thick they are, that's how you want to roll them out. These will puff up a little bit bigger, so they'll be slightly bigger than what these are because, you know, you have the baking soda agent in it. But you don't need to roll them out super thin, because you want your graham cracker to be kind of hearty. It's got to hold, you know, your marshmallow and your chocolate. There we go. But you do want to make sure that they're all about the same thickness. My dog over there is snoring so loud. I don't know if you guys can hear it, but oh my goodness. We have 2 cavies, you know, King Charles Cavalier Spaniels, and they have short snouts, and so they are the loudest snorers. Sometimes in the middle of the night, they wake me up with their snoring. There we go. And we're just gonna cut the edges off. So we have a nice kind of rectangle to work with. Perfect. Pull these away. And we're gonna cut all the way down in half. We're gonna make these are gonna be, some of these are bigger than others, that's okay. And then we're gonna do our little pokes all the way through. Kind of like also when if you ever made like a homemade pastry or pie crust and you wanna bake it first, you'll do the little pokes. Oops. And that just helps it bake nice and even. I do have my oven preheated to 325 degrees. And you bake these like low and slow. So you put them in there, and then about after 15 minutes, you rotate your pan around, and then you bake them for about another 20 minutes. So they need about, 30 to 45 minutes to bake up. Let's see if we can get, well, that was weird. Let's get another spatula. Slide this underneath. I'm gonna pull this forward so we can get a nice row on here. And these last ones baking. And then we'll sprinkle these with cinnamon sugar, and then we'll finish off our lamb stew, and we'll show you how we're eating it.
Do you have a question? Do you plan ahead for your meals, or do you just go day by day?
Day by day. I mean, I have somewhat of a plan in because I go grocery shopping, but with the ingredients that I buy, I can make typically so many different meals with it. So it kind of is how I'm feeling. I'm like, ooh, what do I want today? Now we're gonna get a little feng shui here with make everything fit. We got all of our graham crackers on there. Now we are going to toss a little stuff. So yes, I mean, sometimes I plan it out, but sometimes, I'm like, oh, what can I do with this? We're sprinkling a little bit of cinnamon sugar over the top of each graham cracker. There we go. Again, we have our little shaker always mixed with cinnamon sugar, but if you don't have this at home, just mix, a third cup of sugar in a bowl with about a half a tablespoon of cinnamon, and give it a stir with a fork, and then just sprinkle it over the top. But perfect. Now we are going to pop these in the oven, and we're gonna let them bake, for about 15 minutes, then we rotate, and then it's about another 20 minutes more. And I do have it set to 325 degrees. Perfect. Now let's finish off our lamb stew, and we'll be ready to plate up in just a second. We've had it simmering nice right here, low and slow. I'm gonna give our broth just a little taste to make sure I don't need to add anything else to it before we finish it off. Oh, perfect. Has like the right saltiness and everything. So we're just gonna take some fresh parsley. I'm gonna give this a nice mince through here and coat it all there. Parsley's just gonna add this nice little fresh burst to it, and a nice pop of color. And if you're a person who likes like a thicker stew, you could add a little bit of cornstarch to it, like pull out a little bit of the liquid, stir it with some cornstarch, and then throw it back in there, and that will thicken it up. I like a nice kind of a brothier stew, unless I'm making like a hearty beef stew. There we go. So we've got our parsley. I'm gonna mix it in here.
You have a comment? You should do a cooking class where you live.
Yeah, I've thought about it. I've always thought, everyone always asks me if I can teach them how to cook. And, that's why we do these shows, so people can see and teach. We kind of got a crazy life here. See, my potatoes are nice and tender. I'll show you that. Let me grab a fork. You'll know when your stew is ready because we've got our cooking thing, but as if your fork can just go through here nice and soft. Let me flip it over so I'm not on a skin. But look, these are just perfect. You see how they're just smushing? That is a perfect thing. And that's what's so great about like a baby Dutch or a yellow potato. They just are perfect for stews because they hold their form. Okay, well, let's serve up our Irish lamb stew and our Irish soda bread. Let me grab a ladle out and grab a plate. And of course, my little cauldron here. So we've got our lovely Irish lamb stew. You can see it's got some nice hearty chunks of lamb in it and beautiful broth. So there's our lovely, and we can put a little bit of parsley on the top. And then this is our beautiful Irish soda bread. You can see it's got a nice crust, a good squish. It's kind of like a biscuit. I'm gonna there, and then I'll take another one and I'll show you guys what they look like on the inside. So just look at that. It's got a nice, like almost like a biscuit. They're absolutely delicious and they pair perfectly with the stew. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We try to do live cooking shows every single day. Feel free to either comment or send us a message. If you have any recipes you'd like to see us try or have any cooking questions, we'd love to help you guys out. And then later tonight, we are going to post our graham crackers in a short, show you how they turned out for our s'mores. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and don't forget to like and subscribe.